Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Retro, joined by Dweg and Skriv. We're here, first episode of the Tier 2 talk, and some interesting points to be made this week, lads, and I guess we've been putting this off for a little while, but we are here, talk Counter-Strike, living life. How you both lovely people doing?
Skriv, mate, you want to start here? How do we want to
Yeah,
do this?
well,
Yeah,
you know,
on,
I
mate,
thought
go on.
we'd go in order. You see, I thought we'd go in cam order, so I was a little, but yeah, no, I'm good, man. I'm good. I know the boys. I got a tattoo last week. There you go.
There
you
it
go.
is.
I know you
There
wanted
it
to see
is.
it, so got to be a man of my word. I think it's backwards on the camera, which is a bit awkward, but yeah, no, doing well, mate. Doing well.
Right.
What about you, Dweg? How are you?
Mate, always good. Always good when Counter-Strike's involved. Do you know what I mean? Watching it, casting it, and then even talking about it. Just can't get enough.
The drug, mate, the drug. First thing we can talk about, I guess all three of us have been involved in the event at one point or another, so I think it's quite fitting that we start with it. Obviously, the Elisa 2021 events were closed. Obviously, Skade took it, Heat second place. Pretty interesting event, and something to pick up on, right, was the lack of full three mappers that we had in that event, I think, was something that caught a lot of people by surprise.
What do you reckon, Skriv? I mean, I look at this, and the first thing that I look at this event is normally we get these invitationals where the quarterfinal teams come in. They normally just get pumped, right? Because it's like, oh, it's a Skade or it's a Copenhagen Flames coming through from the main Swiss. But it was almost the opposite this time around, that the teams that we typically saw top main Swiss were actually getting invited forward into the quarterfinals. So rather than getting like, I don't know, your Fanatics or your Bigs or, I don't know, like an EG, like those kind of invites, they just kind of invited some of the top tier 2 teams. And it actually made the bracket overall, at least in the quarterfinal stage, look to be the most competitive we'd had yet. And it just wasn't that at all, which was really surprising.
Yeah, I think that it's maybe for me a better way to operate. You know, to bring in people that are a little more evenly matched, like you say, we have kind of had in the past. At least a few upsets. I remember, like, you know, one. I think it might have been the summer one where Big bombed out a little bit. You know, when people maybe expecting them to actually take it. But yeah, I think for like the theory behind it to make things a bit more competitive and interesting and kind of fair in a way, because you know the Swiss system can be a bit grueling for all these teams to get through, and then you play through and you have your difficult opening matchup or whatever, and then all of a sudden you've just got a team who's kind of fresh and not had as many games going on, and you know they're a clear favorite coming in, and they just sort of smash you. So I think that this system is better, but you know the theory doesn't really work out in practice, like you say, for competition. So yeah, even you know some of your closer games where maybe you're expecting Ensign and Entropic to have a bit of a cool back and forth, just doesn't really happen, right? Like just checking the match page, 9 rounds for Entropic over the course of that series. So you know, yeah, a bit of a weird outcome for sure in that sense, but you know sometimes that's the way it goes, right? You got this packed schedule, and some of the teams, I think, certainly around this time were coming off the back of other tournaments or maybe prepping for a pro league, for example, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one, but really surprising that we don't see some of these games come closer.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is bloody Skade looked really good this event when we knew towards the end of the year, like Skade and Fiend were just so strong in the tier 2 atmosphere. And then obviously Fiend kind of died, and then they took a couple of pieces over Bubble and Dreamer. Now, roles in the team look slightly odd because you got like a lot of lurky players and there's no entry fragger right now. So I think it's going to take some time for the team to come together. But my goodness, like when these guys are in like 2vx's or 1vx's, they just seem to clutch every single time. And for them to not even drop a single map and for them to be as dominant as it is, I think kind of just shows how strong the Bulgarians can be in these Elisa Invitationals. Because I think what Skade have been in like 3 grand finals now, Fiend won the last one. So Bulgarian teams as a whole last year and this year, just unreal. And it's a shame to see that Fiend aren't still around, but at least for Skade, I mean, they're like top 18 in the world. They're at a very good position.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see this time for them with this roster to kind of push it to that next level. I think that's kind of what they lost. I don't know if it's, you know, political or whatever for these moves, but definitely they had a bit of a peak and then they couldn't stick to it really. And I think that was a big struggle last time. So hopefully this time they can keep riding that and competing and get to some bigger events, because I think Skade have always been one of the teams that in the tier 2 scene really impressive and building up as much HLTV ranking as you can, kind of play in that game or whatever. But maybe when it comes to a qualifier or a potential of a play-in, for example, they've struggled there. And then one of the big things, actually, they did get a little wrecked, I think, by some rulings rather than getting dropped down.
For sure.
But they're not in ECL. They're not in that kind of. I think they're sat in advanced at the moment, I would imagine.
No, I think even what happened with them is they were playing advanced and then they took some losses and then they
Right.
couldn't make playoffs, so they just forfeited and then they just dropped completely. I just
Yeah.
thought, like, because you have a look at advanced the last couple of seasons, mate, there are some proper good teams in there that just do not make it out. I don't know what it is, if it's just the best of ones or the veto, but getting advanced promotion is so much tougher for top teams than it should be.
Yeah, I think it definitely comes, and they probably have a little bit of a, dodgy relationship, as it were, with that kind of tournament. Because, like I say, I think it was around the time of the coaching bug. They were one of the teams sort of involved in that, and then I think it had been used in some ESEA games. The team, I can't rightly remember like who, but there were a couple characters that maybe weren't as helpful, and it didn't really help their case, and then they got DQ'd basically, and I think they had to start from open again. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider for Skade, actually, to push it to the next level, to get into a conference or a pro league. They have a lot of work to do, and like you say, advanced so many games. The format has not changed there as it has with ECL. And then also so many strong teams. So yeah, it's a bit rough for them to keep pushing through. But at the minute, yeah, I think that looking really good. Probably the better version of Skade that we've seen at the moment. And this Elisa tournament is just proof that they can really clean up the competition. That's one of the bigger things I think that comes out of this for Skade.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I don't know if you guys have seen much from Exercise, the new French guy on Heat or Double Pony, but when he first joined the team, I was like, all right, looks okay. It's probably going to take some time because he's new to Pro CS, but my goodness, the last couple of weeks or even just like this year, he has been unreal. So maybe he's like another guy we need to keep an eye out for.
I think actually Heat overall have kind of surprised me a bit. Like the whole Double Pony period, right, was pretty cool to see. Like with them doing, like, it wasn't amazing results, but they did have like a fairly good stint in tier 2, right, and shot up the rankings. I think like capped at number 16. We were kind of like, yo, what the hell's going on with this team? Like, they sort of come out of the blue, and ever since joining Heat, like, I wouldn't say there's been more hype. I feel like it has kind of died down a bit, but they're still like bringing in some seriously good results. It does surprise me as well to see like how far that team's come on an individual level as well. I feel like, it was the old reliable maybe of Heat, but now, yeah, I mean, only losing to Skade in that event. I'll bring up the bracket one more time from the quarterfinals onwards, right? The fact that they could 2-0 Ents, I think that was like an eye-opener for everyone, right? Watching this event, it was like, if you can 2-0 a side like Ents, like, what does this mean about your team? And they looked unbelievable through that 2-0 as well, obviously falling to Skade eventually, but yeah, I think definitely a lot of eye-openers, maybe not like the next big thing, maybe, I feel like they're taking the early Entropic route, where it's like they're putting in some serious results, yet to get some gold medals behind them in terms of those bigger tier 2 circuits. But yeah, I mean, another great placing for them, and it only comes with time, this team, to learn. How long have they been together now, right? It hasn't been
ages, because I think the lineup came together at the beginning of last year, so they played what, a year without getting orged. I mean, for any team to actually sit down there with like core 4 or 5 players and say, okay, we're going to work for an entire year, or at least have that mindset of we are going to just keep going until we get an org for that sort of period of time, it's unheard of. Like, it just does not happen. It's normally, all right, few months, doesn't get orged, all right, we just split, we go elsewhere. And they play like good Counter-Strike. They're very tactical. They don't necessarily have always a massive star player. I think Afro with the AWP is showing some pretty good signs. They make some very good adjustments with trading. And then, like, even the Harvu game, they kind of struggled a little bit there, but the way they played against Ents was, yeah, a massive surprise. And then against Heat, or against Skate, I should say, in the final, they looked a little bit nervous. It could be that the first grand final in like a bigger event, because I know that they've won the multi vibes. They obviously qualified through the RMR, which we can talk about later. But another grand final, I mean, for Heat as an org to think that they've signed these teams, or this team, and within the space of a couple of months, they're getting grand final placings in tier 2 events, it's already a good sign.
Yeah, I like them a lot. I like them a lot. I do enjoy watching them. I think they maybe again have a little bit of a ceiling. You know, it's one of the things that maybe there's a bit of a reinvention for Body in the IGL, but you know, for people who have watched the game for a while, Body and Lucky may have already achieved their ceiling in CS. You know, playing in the G2 roster back in the day. So I think that certainly there are maybe a few players that you've got to point towards, maybe a few areas for improvement. Jocko can sometimes be a little bit inconsistent for my money. He has some really good force buy rounds, which is kind of cool. Yeah, great deagle on that guy. And that, you know, that's kind of invaluable in the current state of the game. But I think that he can certainly be a little bit of a difficult player to work around. And you know, it seems, as you kind of touch on, that they maybe have a little bit of looseness in terms of the stars and whatnot. I think they're another team where there's a little bit more of a tactical level, but similar to Skade, their roles are not super defined. And Jocko seems to be the player that kind of, you know, it changes around a little bit, and they're not quite sure where to put him in some of the rounds, right? But definitely Afro and Exercise, you know, it's tough because you've only really got Vitality at that top level.
Yeah, you're not gonna get a call
you know,
up
if you're like other French rosters or whatever, then maybe these are guys that you would look towards. But I guess Heat at the moment are, you know, the second best. So where do you really put them? But yeah, I like watching this team. I think that they have some pretty clever rounds, and they, you know, really solid fundamentals. But they have these rounds where they kind of just tweak that rule a little bit, or tweak that protocol a little bit, and that change in the middle of a round even can really catch their opponents off and end up in some really cool moments. So I don't know. I like him, and like you say, Exercise has really come into his own. It certainly looked for a little while there that once they lost MBK, they'd lost some of their mojo. And then obviously, you know, they've got the struggles of, sure, they do really well to keep together. Yeah, like you say, with no org, but that's got to take a bit of a toll. And I think Body, and they did have a bit of a manager, but I think Body's doing a lot of work trying to sort it out and find someone. And then there was rumors about 6 months ago that they were going to sign with someone, and then it, I guess, fell through or whatever. So, you know, things like that, the extracurricular has definitely kept this team back a little bit. And now we're starting to see them really come into their own. But as noted with the final, clearly there's some work to be done.
Yeah.
What I did want to talk about maybe a little bit further down earlier in the event is the main Swiss stage, and I feel like there's a big talking point here. Ecstatic going 3-2 overall in the main Swiss stage. Savage themselves going 3-0. The only other team, of course, to join them there is Eternal Fire. Entropic dropping a series. Sprout looking pretty good. Dignitas, of course, scoring 3-1 as well. What's our opinions on that? I think it was a bonkers main Swiss stage. Obviously, Ecstatic, as I said, they went 2-0 up overall, beating Enterprise and AGF, losing 2-0 to Savage, losing 2-1 to Dignitas. Again, I think a big talking point for me was the Danes outside of this event. I mean, pretty solid stuff. They're currently playing in the Pinnacle Winter Series. We'll talk about that in a just a quick moment here. But Ecstatic 3-2, nearly getting dropped out of the main Swiss stage. Ex-AGF putting up a fight against some pretty solid sides as well. Like, I feel like there's a lot to discuss here in the main Swiss stage. Any teams in particular that caught your eye for the right or the wrong reasons?
I think that just straight off the bat, what I wanted to say is that this kind of format with this many teams in a you know, tier 2 event like this, and the way that they kind of play it, a little bit of a, you know, quote unquote qualifier stage with the regionals and things like that. I think the way that Elisa do things and the invites that they get and whatnot, actually they end up with some really stacked like main Swiss
Mm.
areas, right? Where it's nice and balanced, where you've got a couple favorites, which don't always, it's not necessarily coming, but you'd say looking at this one, looking at the form, you've got like Entropic, Sprout, Ecstatic would probably be the three that you'd expect to do the best. And then you maybe have a couple that you could see struggling, right? And for me, realistically, it'd be teams like LFO, Linvision, Enterprise, but again, it doesn't quite live up to that. And then the midfield is massive, right? And I think that's kind of what you want, where you have these teams in the middle that everybody, in theory, is able to beat everybody, and then you also get mixed in there a little bit of luck, a little bit of excitement for some of these teams where they are indeed able to pull off some upsets. It might not be the whole way, but it makes it a little more interesting, right? Like Ecstatic was a team that I listed there as getting through, and they did, but obviously it's work, right? So I think the way that they work things out in terms of the invites, in terms of the format in general this season, was really, really good. In terms of the teams that, look a little bit, I think XAGF getting through is kind of crazy, right? Finest at this time, we're on a little bit of a cool ride. Blink is a bit of a shame, as one that stands out, right? And I think that, if you're in the know, you'll kind of know why. They were going through some roster flux, I think is even like it just, from one week to another, it was one team, then it was the old team, then it was like a new team with 3 of the same players but 2 new ones, and then 2 of the same players, but then they brought in, someone else that had been in the team before but not for a while. A really, really weird sort of 6-week period I think that Blink were having, and this was unfortunately at the peak of that. But yeah, and then I maybe expected AGO to do a little better as well, to be honest, especially in some of the losses that they took. So, but yeah, the big one that stands out is Blink as a bit of an unfortunate turn of affairs, because I think they were in a really good spot at the tail end of last year for maybe becoming another one of these break into the top 30 and maybe into the top 20 type tier 2 teams, but just fell apart apparently.
Yeah, I think just maybe just running quickly with a few of the teams. I think Linvision, I was hoping that they were going to win a series because they actually play some like wild Counter-Strike. It was just a bit of a shame. They had a really close game against Harvu that they ended up losing. Enterprise, they're going through roster shuffles. Blink, you kind of mentioned on it, Skriv, like what's happening there with the roster. They're now the Bad News Eagles. AGO, very young roster right now. Like when I think back to AGO back in the day, your Groovy and your Furlan and Sydney and MHL, like, okay, maybe he's a little bit younger, but you had guys in there, Rowland from times, and now I look at it, and other than Furlan, like everyone is like 20 or younger. So new direction for AGO. 777, I think things are still very rough for that team. They had that one really good run a few events ago in Elisa, and then nothing other than that. Finest again, you never really know who's playing except the most recent roster changes. LFO, for a team from Oceania to get a couple of wins and nearly get through, was a decent showing. And then Harvu as well. I don't know if you've seen much of them, Ryan or Skriv, but they've, ever since like the middle of maybe last year to now, they haven't quite been able to find a peak, but it seems like the lineup has some level of potential. I just don't know how long that's actually going to take.
Harvu's a really interesting one because I think that when the whole Champion of Champions circuit opened up, they were the team that won, I think, a couple of the sort of relog circuit tournaments for sure, and looked very good. And now that you're in this difficult position where you're a bit of a smaller org, bit of a smaller team, you've shown in the past that we can get there and we can beat some of these tier 2 contenders. So you're kind of in this weird limbo of like, do we stick together and try and hit that ceiling again, or are we gonna try and make some moves? Is there someone that we can maybe point towards and or a couple people and make some hefty moves? So very, very strange for Harvu that I think at the moment it's looking like kind of an extended one, but a flash in the pan when they were able to, take the lead in the points and all that kind of stuff for this massive tier 2 circuit that's going on. And since then they've, still done okay. I think there was one main Swiss, wasn't there, where they went like 1-3, I think, in summer, maybe
Yeah, it could be.
maybe in fall. But yeah, they definitely have had some struggles. At the moment, you know, just kind of looking okay, I think. So yeah, Havu is definitely a curious case, because it is as a team you play with people that you like. There's probably not any problems in the team or anything like that. And like I say, you've hit this level. So do we just keep at it and hope that it comes back, or what? You know. So I think they're in a really weird spot as a squad.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Pinnacle Winter Series 3. Obviously, we now know our top 4. One of the games going on currently. It is, of course, Ecstatic, Heroic, Skade, and Copenhagen Flames. Always interests me, these Relog Media events. Some for the right reasons, some for the wrong ones. I think that there's definitely always interest when it comes to these events, right? In that we actually have no clue who the invited teams are. More or less, the invited teams take a stomp. For example, the invited teams this time around were Ecstatic, Heroic, Dignitas, Copenhagen Flames. 3 of the 4 teams made it through. Skade beat Dignitas. They're the only team that came from the main Swiss to get moved up. Currently going on, Ecstatic versus Heroic. It's 18-21 in map 2 in favor of Heroic, who are on map 1, map up. Ecstatic running them deep. They've just won the series 2-0. Literally just then won the series 2-0.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's Ecstatic out. But what I did want to talk about, I guess, obviously feeding out of our point from, or rather my point from the Elisa event and into the Relog Media stuff, Ecstatic, consistent placements. Skade as well in the bigger picture. Copenhagen Flames, although we didn't see them in the Elisa event this time round, still look a bit interesting, right? Because I think post LAN, it's again like the Copenhagen. We're starting to see the Copenhagen Flames we saw maybe building up to the major, rather than what we saw post major, which was a very, very deflated Danish side going through all sorts of internal trouble. Their top 4 obviously still have to play their game against Skade in 40 minutes or so. But top 4 actually, Heroic in the picture, getting an invite maybe to the LAN Sweet LAN. Always a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, I think Heroic, it's definitely a lot of fun. Heroic have absolutely got to win this tournament, though. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're top 5 team in the world, I believe, this week, you know? So, yeah, definitely have to win. I think certainly Ecstatic can be kind of happy with the way that that's gone. So just very quickly, you know, it's only just finished, but to just touch on looking at the page and everything, it was their pick that goes to the double overtime there. So I think that's fair. You learn from it. A couple of individuals maybe not able to keep up for that long, getting a bit fatigued and whatnot. But like you say, the consistent placings, and again, I think that they also went through a little bit. You talk about the Copenhagen Flames. They themselves on Ecstatic had a little bit at the start of this year of losing to some teams that maybe they shouldn't. And the past 2 or 3 weeks even, they have kind of started to turn things around again and look a bit more consistent. And I know, you know, I had Wolfie on for an interview and everything, and he said that they were going to be a bit more selective with some of the tournaments. So I think that they're really thinking about what they pick, and I'm sure they will have done a decent amount of prep for this one. But again, another team that may be, you know, suffering from a disparity in terms of you've got some really great potential in the likes of Fasher is definitely the most impressive looking player. Wolfie not too far behind him. Dafu has some pretty good games, but I think that, you know, Bird from Sky, they really like him, but it's hard, man. It's very hard. Not many in-game leaders, you know, even Carrigan with all the firepower on his team, when he doesn't frag, they struggle, you know? So I think certainly there's some issues with Ecstatic for sure. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on that game. I don't know if you want to touch on the one that's coming up, Dweg.
Well, just to touch on Ecstatic a little bit longer, I mean, the in-game leader, Bird from Sky, has been a part of Lingby, or the core, since 2017. So we're approaching 5 years now, which is kind of crazy. I think Fasher, individually speaking, is potentially a top 3 player of the best aimers we have in the Tier 2 scene, just mechanically speaking.
Yep.
Is unbelievable. The issue I have with Ecstatic is whenever I've seen them or I'm casting them is they're just so damn inconsistent. Like they can come into some series and they look incredible. They've got their tactics down pat, they've got the right reads, and then there's other games where it just feels like everything's falling apart. So I think if they can find that consistency, because if you look back to last year and maybe even 2020 as well, those maps, last 3 months, last 6 months, those Lingby guys were grinding like there's no tomorrow. So if Skriv's kind of getting the info that they're being more selective about the events, I think that's only a positive for this team on just playing less maps, less officials, and just focusing a little bit more. Skade Copenhagen Flames is obviously a rematch from the semi-finals of Elisa playoffs. It's also the rematch between Bubble and Dreamer of the RMR spot, which was the 7th place decider to get to the major on LAN at IM Full, and then, of course, the grand final from the previous Invitational of Elisa. So there's a lot of history between Skade and Copenhagen Flames. The fear factor is, of course, what happened last time, that the Flames weren't even able to take a map, and that result wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see the rest of this thing turn out. As Skriv said, though, I think if Heroic lose this BO3 in the finals, probably going to be against Skade. Like, you'd be pretty shocked to see, you know, even if Skade were to take a map, I think that's a result for them. Obviously, to go down the pecking order a bit here, we have Mouse NXT also going 3-0 in their group, and it was Ungentium, right? The team that we talked about before we even booted up the stream today, Dweg, that this team out of absolutely nowhere feels a little bit like the rejects of Poland putting together a team, and my god, do they look good. Like, crazy good, in fact. It's shocking. They're 57th in the world, bearing in mind, obviously, the ranks updated, 2 days ago, and they are absolutely popping off. Like, just to reel off some of their recent games, obviously, as I said, they were the team to take down Mouse NXT 2-1. Going beyond that history, they had a 16-2 over Apex Rebels. There's a 2-1 over Tricked in there. They did lose out on Endpoint, but they'd beaten Gamer Legion. They had a decent run against Kova. Did take a map off of Bad News Eagles as well. Like, the guys are on the up, and that's another side, Polish as well, talking about the Mouse NXT game, that have surprised me majorly, and I think a lot of people at home as well.
I'd never heard of this team, honestly. I looked at the players, and obviously Groovy we know. Like, he's been around the whole Tier 2 scene for ages. Exus, I remember him and playing on like a Zarko Boars, and then Sydney was playing in some of the 2020 lineups of AGO. Yep. Prism, I think we saw a few times, didn't we, Skriv, when they were on Honorous, like the early days of
Very
Honorous?
Early, yeah. He wasn't there for a while, but for long, I should say. But yeah.
And then there's this Matai, I don't know him. And Luz, the coach, I know him. He was playing on something like Pact or Azarko Boars as a player. I don't remember him as a coach, so that might only be a recent thing. So there's obviously pieces we know of in this lineup, and I watched them play Mouse NXT. I was so surprised with this team, because normally if there's teams that you don't know of, you may know some of the players, but you just haven't seen them in playoff positions. For them to beat Mouse NXT and to have a quarterfinal placing, I think it's an unreal achievement.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll be real. I've not seen an awful lot of this team. You know, I'm kind of maybe even more in the dark than you are, sort of thing. But I don't know. What I will say, it just kind of again is a bit of a testament to the Polish scene. Really goes deep, and you know, a lot of great individuals. I think they perform very well online as a country. You know, and we've gone through these sort of eras almost of having like an AGO that's dominant, Anonymo, and Pacts and things like that. All these kind of teams. I think definitely Anonymo were really up there at the start of the pandemic. You know, so it's kind of cool to see another one come to light. Once again, though, we're in this same sort of area where consistency is a big question, but also it's just kind of, you know, you maybe have a few members here that look really cool. Can we get them together with some of the others? You know, what's the internal like politics like? Because we did have that for a while, for a good year to 18 months. We had like, you know, the team is there. They're just all spread about, and you know, you've got a couple members on this team carrying them to victories, and you've got a couple members on this team carrying them to victories. So Yeah, we'll see. I'm definitely hedging my bets that they keep this up. But you know, if you say you're liking them and they look fairly legit in the Mouse game, then fair enough. But
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of out of nowhere. But it seems, you know, you look on the page and you look back at the history, they have been at it for a while. It's not like a mix that's come together and
Yeah.
just, you know, upset a load of people. They have been playing since the tail end of last year. So, and obviously with all their cool jerseys, they have a bit of an org behind them as well, it looks like.
Yeah, quite a nice way to round up, right? The underdog competition. And speaking of, I think I want to talk about this more than anything. A big topic for us all to sort of discuss, right, is the RMRs. And now that they're set up, ready to go. Obviously, we had the HLTV post. I want to say not too long ago now, just a couple of days. Basically saying like, here's the team set. We now know the groups. We now know what the competition's going to be like. Gonna kick things off with a question from chat here. Ben asks, are the RMRs an improvement on the old minor system? This being the third of the RMRs now. What do we think, guys, on the desk here? Are we fans of the new system of the RMRs, or do we prefer the minor and the major stages like we had a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one because I think got, you know, not to keep plugging or whatever, but I've got another interview and I asked he had a really good answer. Slight, you know, preview, I guess, for people. I got an interview with Barry, the coach of Sprout, and he had a really good answer for a similar sort of question that I posed to him, where you know, you're able to play so many teams, right, in the actual RMR, rather than the minors. And, you know, you can maybe have a game off against some of the bigger teams, and sure, you might not win it, but you're still going to rack up the points as well in a way. So you're not necessarily getting knocked out, rather than like in the minor system where they were pretty grueling, the way that they worked, right? I think that was GSL, so you could get knocked out pretty quickly because there was so many teams involved. And then, you know, you work your way through, you maybe perform well in the opening stages, had many different names, of course, but, you know, those first stages. And then all of a sudden, you've got the likes of Na'Vi waiting for you, who you've never played, ever. You've never seen them contend off against, like, teams that are, in theory, way worse than they are, like they may do at an RMR, right? So you have pretty much nothing to go off of, and then you've got to try and, you know, beat one of the best teams in the world. And I think that it kind of sets you up for failure with the minor system. But with the RMRs, little more space to maybe get a game in there, maybe get a close map in there that you can learn from. At the very least, see how they do against, you know, a team that is in a similar position to yourself. And especially this time, because obviously we have the CIS mixed in with Europe. So everybody's playing everybody over in Europe. Might be a bit tougher on some of the Americas teams and whatnot, some of the Asian teams and whatnot. But I think for the hub of Counter-Strike, it's a really, really solid system.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is like maybe it's a nostalgia, but I used to really like the minor qualifiers that were just before the major. So I'm thinking like Cato 2015, where like you'd almost play the minor on LAN, and then the next day or 2 days after that, the major would start immediately, and it's sort of that build up rather than having a spacing gap. Overall, though, the RMRs, I like the EU and CISs together. That's how it should be, because really, if you're in like one of those last placements from EU or CIS and you just make it and you're not a competitive team to that level, you shouldn't be there. So put them all together, you'll get some more competitive nature. Little bit disappointed that the Asia RMR is small in how many teams are there. When I think about yeah, that was, I mean, just because I come from that region as well, and I look at, like, there was obviously the Chinese qual, there was the Oceanic qual, and I think there was the Asia qualifier and Middle Eastern. There's no, like, Israeli qualifier that we used to have, maybe a couple of spots for China, a couple of spots for Oceania. And when the EU and CIS and NA RMRs are all 16 teams, to see the Asia RMR being 4 teams was a slight letdown for me.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Just kind of, you know, refreshing and looking back, because it also, you're trying to develop these regions. I think that's ultimately, you know, what we say about those areas in terms of the Counter-Strike, is that they are developmental, you know, trying to maybe where NA was a few years ago, where they were very confused and I don't know. It's hard not to, sound kind of patronizing, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a couple of teams that can maybe contend, but when you have like Renegades or whatever have qualified here from Oceania, for example, and then we've just had LFO come out and play in Pro League and everything, it gets a bit confusing, and the opportunities are so slim that it's difficult for these teams to play off against the best teams in the world and learn from them, right? So yeah, I think 4 is got to be at least 8, surely.
That's
I
what I was
understand like
thinking. 16,
where
I
you're
think, is too
coming
many.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
such a small region. Because at least with NA, you've got NA and SA too, so
Yes.
I can understand that. But for Asia, I think 8 minimum next time around would be a big
4 is
upgrade.
kind of crazy. 4 is
Yeah.
actually kind of crazy, to be honest.
And I mean, we could touch on it a little bit later when we talk about the results, but like even those 8, like for the Asia RMR, there were so many upsets because there has to be, right? If there's only 4 teams coming in, there has to be upsets and teams that kind of should be there or expected to be there that just ended up not qualifying through.
Yeah, let's touch on Europe first things first. Obviously, 16 spots between the plethora of teams that we have. Just to list off a couple that I think I'm super interested in watching. Obviously, Na'Vi is always going to be a talking point for us. I guess I'll just go in group order, right? We've got Na'Vi, Heroic, VP, Vitality Phase, Mouse, Big, Gamer Legion, Fnatic, Saw, OG, Eternal Fire, Dignitas, Unique, Fours, and Quasar, Kazar, however that's said. For me, again, it's always going to be difficult, right? When you have obviously all these invites coming in because of the previous major and the previous events through this sort of stage, it's always going to be difficult. Basically, from Mouse below, maybe even including Mouse in this scenario, right? It's like your Bigs, your Gamer Legions, your Fanatics. I mean, absolutely. Like, we know that they can put up a fight, and I think this is a testament to Big and Fnatic majoritively, and maybe even OG to talk about as well. Like, okay, cool. It's still looking pretty good for you guys. Like, there's no denying that maybe, there is an upset over Mouse. Maybe you can, find some really decent results for the people below you, but fighting those above, I think, is going to be difficult. And in my opinion, I can't wait to watch these RMRs because the middle of the pack is going to be so close. And I mean, I'm not really up to date on how they're going to run all of this and how it sort of will all pan out. But at the end of the day, like, it matters majorly how you play against the middle of the pack, right? I think, like, that is going to be always the bit that we're going to watch for. Is maybe, okay, I'm not going to watch the Na'Vi games just because, I mean, it's bloody Na'Vi at the end of the day, isn't it? At the end of the day, I'm going to be watching your Fanatics and your Bigs to see, are they going to pull off an upset over the people above them, and how do they rank against those in the middle of the pack as well?
Yeah, I don't know. Just kind of looking through it, I'm not sure. I'll not call anything out because I'd maybe need to go back and just sort of double check the way that the groups and who's in the groups has been worked out. But it definitely feels like A is a lot more stacked than B, for sure. So that's certainly something to consider. Is that I think Group A could get a bit weird actually. Like, if you do have one of these teams, bigger teams losing out to the up and comers, the qualifiers as it were, then yeah, maybe they have a bit of a tougher ride, right, and end up playing a big name for an elimination. So that's kind of curious. That is kind of curious. I think that we could be in for something a bit interesting. But then at the same time, because of all the reshuffles and everything, I don't know if your Na'Vis and your Heroics and stuff like that, if it's decided just off of where they placed at the last major. And then obviously we've had a lot of reshuffles since then. So yeah, definitely interesting in that sense. But I agree with you. I think that they're wide open in Europe, wide open in that midfield, and there's so many spots because if you look through, you got Na'Vi, Heroic, VP, Vitality, FaZe, G2, Gambit, NiP. Don't really know. I would say those are your teams that you kind of feel are a bit of a guarantee, right? OG maybe, Big are looking a bit weird for me at the moment. Mouse are looking a bit weird. Fanatics looking a bit weird. So there's actually a lot of space for some of these, up and coming teams and some of these more established tier 2 names. I hope Endpoint make it. That would be very cool. If Endpoint make it, we all have to We all have to get a section
another
of the
tattoo,
stadium.
Skriv, another tattoo.
Oh bloody hell! I don't know. I don't know about that. It'd be a bit soon. I think I've learned my lesson.
Win the major?
And if they win the major, yeah, I'll say yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I'll
was gonna
say
say
that.
I'd join you on that. If Endpoint win
Yeah,
the major,
yeah,
I'd
'cause
get an Endpoint tattoo. Absolutely.
That would be absolutely wild, and you definitely have to commemorate that, to be honest.
Of course.
But no, I think the old eat the boot. I've figured that one, and then you just buy a chocolate boot. A very good friend of mine gave me that advice to get out of. So there you go. If they make the major, I'll eat a boot. How about that? But yeah, I don't know. I think it should be really exciting. There's a lot of potential, and I think that mixing CIS in, it should be done, and it really is a lot healthier because in the previous CIS RMRs, there's obviously a bit of weirdness going on with Akuma, but like there were also some teams in there that you don't see an awful lot of. They don't take part in the mid-level tournaments and whatnot. Like we're at Indie IRA now and all this kind of stuff. So people have always kind of said it's a bit weird that they have a few too many spots. And I think looking at this, we've got like Arv, Unique, Kazar, Bad News Eagles maybe, but there's names wise they have some decent players. Other than that, it's kind of how you would expect it, right? You've got the top teams, you've got some vying to be top teams, and then you've got some solid tier 2 contenders that you're not really surprised to see here. So I think this is the way that it should work out, rather than being like, who are these guys? You know what I mean? Like, which we do definitely have, especially from the CIS region in a lot of the older majors. So I really like the way that it's shaping up.
Yeah, if I look at the Group A teams, just like if I'm going to look at the Tier 2 teams rather than obviously the top dogs, I think obviously Gamer Legion have been working very hard recently to get themselves up the rankings and to get themselves further. The issue they find a lot of the time is the lack of success of actually winning events or qualifying is their biggest issue. I think you touched on it a little bit with like the MDL, right? Or the Premier, is that they really struggled to ever make the playoffs or to have that next run up. So this should be a good siding for them. Saw, I think they had a very good 2020. And then 2021 was like a little bit on the down, and then they dropped rankings hard. And they ended up going back to the core 5. So experience is definitely there. I don't think they'll be a favorite to do all that much. Obviously, Eternal Fire, like Xantara's on LAN, keen for that, right? He's a monster online and been a monster since joining this team. For Dig, I think they'll be an excellent RMR team. Forest, Freiburg, Lecro on LAN, like that. Yeah. That's them in their element. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do. Team Unique, they're obviously the 100 ping gods, aren't they? And they're probably one of those teams that you mentioned just before, Skriv, that we don't really get to see all that often. But they might be able to create an upset or two. Forza as well have got a very high ceiling, but maybe don't show it in every single event possible. And then this team Quasar that came through from the Far East Russia qualifier. I love the way as well that they've got like Far East spots, because we've seen it in the past where unless you're more towards the European side, you're just done just with the location, right? And that we even had a lot of players from that sort of area actually even play in Asia, because you're just so far away from Europe that connecting with Japanese teams and Chinese teams is the only option possible. So having an extra qualifier, something that we haven't seen before. Do we want to touch on Group B now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll run through it all, maybe for those that don't know the teams. We've got G2, Gambit, NIP, Entropic, Copenhagen Flames, Astralis, Ent, all invited from the previous major. And then we've got Heat, Sinners, Spirit, Arve, Sprout, Bad News Eagles, Endpoint, Sangal, Anonymo. Again, I feel like, in fact, this is more than what I was saying in Group A, being that the middle of the pack is so tight-knitted, right? And I think, as we were talking about in the Elisa event earlier, Heat beating Ents, I think, summarizes this group quite nicely, right? Is Ents were obviously invited through the Stockholm Major of last year, but on a similar sort of level, we have Spirit. We have Sprout obviously making changes at the end of last year. Maybe you wouldn't put them on the same plate as Heat or Ents, but absolutely can put up a fight. But the same sort of, you know, slice of the pie that you give to Sprout, you would give to Bad News Eagles, to your Endpoints, to your Sandgirls, to your Anonymous, your RVs included, your Sinners as well. There are so many teams at the middle of the pack. Bearing in mind the top 8 teams only get the places. Like, when we run through this Swiss stage in Group B, I think this is even tighter than Group A in terms of who makes it through and who makes it out. And that means the round difference means everything. The teams that you play against mean that little bit more. And I mean, if you draw a G2 or a Gambit early, obviously because we use the Bechol system, it's kind of like, okay, we've played the better teams. Is this going to be the easier run? And then obviously through this whole Swiss stage, like, it matters your placement and your round difference overall to see what place you get, right? Because you get the legend status for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. You get the challenger status, obviously, for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. And if you go 8th, you get contender. So even if you're in that 6th to 8th bracket, the round difference makes up for it. And so for the middle of the pack, especially in this group, basically from Ents downwards, like, this is going to be so difficult for a lot of these teams to find their way out.
You know, all right, here's a bit of a hot take that's kind of just come to me as you're talking it through, right? I honestly think that actually G2 are like the only team that I can surely 100% say
Make it.
that they're going to get through.
Yeah.
Because you have the global situation, we don't really know how that's going to pan out, right? And there's a couple of decent, you know, Russian teams in here. In Gambit and Entropic, so not quite sure what's going to happen. They're going to be able to play under that, and it's all a bit weird at the moment, of course. So that's certainly something to consider. There's also the fact Gambit on a real still, for me, as yet to prove themselves on LAN. NIP, it's all very, you know, with what's going on, is Brolin going to be joining? Is that going to sort their problems? You know, I still think that they're a pretty decent shoe-in, but I'd say there's, you know, more like a 90% chance. There's a bit of an opportunity. Maybe they get a tough matchup or whatever, and it knocks them down and sends them off their feet, and they're not really able to recover. I'd probably put Entropic up there at the moment. You know, the Pro League performance looking good. The online results are looking pretty good. So I think I can certainly see them. But yeah, and then, you know, your Astralis, who knows? Like, you know, we've seen 2 very different versions of that team over the past few months. And then beyond that, yeah, it is definitely. But I think in Group B, the midfield is much bigger, basically. You know, even those top 3, those main contenders in G2, Gambit, and NIP that you would kind of logically say with their world placing and everything, they're not as solidified. They're not as solid. And who's to say as well, you know, G2, now it is the RMR, I think they'll turn it on and, you know, the Kovac magic and whatnot. But obviously they've just had a terrible showing at Pro League. So, yeah, it's a very hard group to predict, I think, for sure.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about this one is upsets are coming for Group B. Just think of the idea, best of ones for all matches except for elimination and promotions. So your 0-1 or your round 1 and your round 2 games, if you win them, are best of ones, mate. These teams are going to really give it when you've got best of ones that are going to be coming through. So I think about the RMRs last time. Think about IM Full. There was that Group D one where I think it had like Skade, Fiend, and then Double Pony, and then a couple of like the tier 1 teams. And literally every game in that group was just an upset. So I've got a very good feeling that Group B is going to offer up a lot of upsets for these open qualifying teams. Spirits, I don't know, like, you've got a core, right, of the old team. But I actually haven't seen much of them. They're actually not playing a crazy amount of events recently. Sinners, we saw Oscar apparently leaving to join that Gorillas lineup. We don't even know what's going on over there. So Forzy has come in. So I'm going to be at least seeing what they can do on LAN. Heat, again, we kind of spoke about them a little bit earlier with Elisa. Arve, these guys stick together. Like, I'm not too familiar with this team, but every time I look at the lineup, I go, yeah, I've seen that lineup about 6 months ago, 9 months ago, whatever it may be. So they might be able to do something. I don't think they're a favorite, right, out of these open qualifier teams to go deep, but who knows? Sprout, Stair and Marex seem to be some very good additions. I mean, losing someone like Farfan, you can't replace that sort of player, but you can at least get the best outcome possible and try and work a team around. This Bad News Eagles, the old Blink guys, I saw them their first game in Elisa before obviously they had all the roster issues. And there is not many teams that I look at and I am genuinely impressed by individual prowess. Like, these guys hit incredibly hard. Their skill ceiling is some of the highest that we have in tier 2. Maybe the tactical depth is going to take some further time and more experience playing it with these sort of teams, but just hitting on the server, they're insane. So I'm very keen to see what they do. Endpoint as well seems like this year has definitely been further on the up than it was in the tail of last year. Sangle, I mean, you look at the lineup, and no disrespect, but it looks like a mixed team. Obviously, they were one of the upsetting teams to come through the last qualifier. And there's some names on there. Skrunk, he used to play on alternate attacks. Sensei, who I think we saw playing with the Eternal Fire guys on Sangle.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess Sangle as well, but when they were Turkish. And then Soulfly, I'm not familiar with. Corey, we've seen on like BP5, because of course all the Hungarians play there. And then even Kubi, I'm not too familiar with either. So them and Anonymo, for me, are like the two teams that the expectations are very minimal, but I hope they do well.
Yeah, and obviously talking about all these moves and all the players and whatnot, what I do want to talk about our last point, and I guess this kind of opens up for the questions at home. We just talk about the roster shuffles and everything like that.
Okay.
So yeah, feel free to fire away your questions in the chat as to what you guys want to know and what you want to ask the fine people on the desk. But I guess a big one for me, and one point I did kind of want to bring up, was Fnatic, in the sense that we've just seen, you know, a call up of a fair few of these academy players. Obviously, I don't particularly want to talk too much about Fnatic as a core because they are a tier 1 team, but obviously we were kind of in and out with the situation of the call-ups for the Fnatic Rising side. Obviously, right now, the most recent addition being the Pepzor pickup, and then obviously we've had a couple of others here and there jump in and out. What do we think? Obviously, Regali as well now in the main roster. I'm a little bit torn. I think, you know, okay, easy to say there are better options, but are we going to start seeing more and more teams call up these academy players and obviously utilizing them a little bit more?
I think it's kind of interesting because ultimately, you know, Fnatic as a team or whatever, in a bit of panic mode, but different from a couple of years ago, even, you know, not that far removed in the life cycle of a team like Fnatic. They don't have to miss an event when they're in roster flux. They don't have to sacrifice a qualifier or whatever. And it might not be the best version of them, but they're able to bring in these more experience, definitely in terms of the, you know, sort of team structure. And who knows what goes on, you know, as Alex spent a day talking to these guys prior and giving them some advice before they go off and play in the We Play Academy League or what, right? So I think certainly we're in a much better position from that kind of perspective as a game, that they're able to, yes, indeed, maybe have an issue. Yes, indeed, maybe Brolin's like, look, man, some of the rumors, some of the thinking around it was that he wasn't comfortable in English. And I think Khan, you know, said as much in HLTV confirmed recently. So something like that, where it's like he's trying it out and he's like, look, I just can't do this. And rather than being forced to play and being unhappy or whatever, you can bring in an academy player pretty quickly, right? But as we've seen with, you know, some of the people, because it's been Pepzor, Banjo, Regali, not necessarily all at the same time, but they're all academy players. But now it's only really Pepzor. So I think they've only come in, unfortunately, because they have to, rather than, oh, these guys look really good, let's put them in the main roster. Maybe Pepzor sticks around, but we'll see. I think that they will be looking for other options for sure.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Ryan, if don't mind, just quickly touch on who qualified from some of the other RMRs. Like, we don't have to go into depth of, like, you know, what we thought. But I think for NA, seeing Bad News Bears actually qualify was a slight surprise for me. we saw in the second one, EG got upsetted in the first one, didn't they?
Yeah.
And then they came back in the second. So I don't think there's many two surprises with the NA qualifier. I think South America as well, everyone that we thought would make it through pretty much did. There's a couple of like South American teams I'm not too familiar with that we'll see at the RMR. In Asia, obviously, or the Asia RMR, Tai Lu made it through. I mean, no surprise there. The Oceanic one, Renegades went through. LFO had to play in the Middle Eastern one because obviously they couldn't go back to Oceania because they were here for Pro League. So they played through the Middle Eastern RMR, which Lin Vision ended up winning, which is like another Chinese team, but yet they're here in Europe. So they have to play through the Middle Eastern qualifier. So a little bit touch and go there with like who should be playing in the events and not, but they ended up coming through. I think in the Oceanic one, not seeing Order in the grand final was very intriguing, and Paradox made it through. Vertex went out very early, and then the Asia qualifier. So Rare Atom is the Vici lineup because Vici renamed. Didn't make it in, which I think was the favored to make it through that way. The Mongols went out early, which is like Machine Gun and that. D13, another one of those sort of Asia teams that we've seen in Europe, also didn't even make top 4. So as a whole, there were some crazy upsets in the Asia RMR, but for North America and South America, I think everything went pretty smoothly. Nothing there otherwise.
Yeah, fair enough. Obviously, I think the only downside that we've said so far is the lack of teams in the Asia RMRs, and overall, I think I'd like to see maybe a little bit more, I don't know, maybe not so much coverage, but I wasn't as clued up as I thought maybe on the American RMRs and stuff like that. But other than that, I think I'm super stoked to see these European RMRs play out. Like, I absolutely can't wait to see how this one goes. It's going to be day after day of watching it, just because they are going to be so intense, right? You don't know how it's going to go. Yeah. Middle of the pack's pretty strong. So yeah, no, I completely agree. I think over on the NARMR side of things as well, there's 6 slots given across, and there's 16 teams if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know, it's going to be difficult. It's a little bit of a harsher climate than that of the European RMR. I think there's 32 teams and 16 spots, so 50% of the teams go through. For America, it's less than that. Asia's 50% as well. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, right? And obviously all eyes maybe on your complexities and your liquids and your furias. But no, absolutely. I think it's going to be a matter of upsets and things like that, and just jumping straight in the deep end with that, right? Is that, you know, who's going to be the first upset? Who's going to be the first team to fall? I guess that's the questions we'll be asking ourselves, which start on April 17th to the 20th, the Group A, and Group B, the 21st to the 24th. So we're not that far off, gents, until the RMRs, and obviously that'll be a big telltale.
Yeah, to bring us back, I guess, in the shuffle. Sorry about that.
You're good, mate.
The one thing I would give a grand gesture to is somebody retiring after nearly 7 years on Tai Lu. That is insane. 7 years on one team. A fair play to the bloke. I mean, again, like, we're probably more so talking about the EU and CIS teams, but that no one stays on one team for that long. So I hope he enjoys his retirement trip.
Yeah. It's notable, isn't it? It's notable. And I think, again, you know, we talk about it as a bit of a developmental region, losing someone with that kind of experience, who's been, you know, to many international events and whatnot, is kind of invaluable. I think though, for sure, it's Bentec that's replaced him.
That's
I
right.
caught them a few weeks ago. So that's certainly something that is, you know, maybe an up, maybe a plus. He comes back with a lot of experience from the NA scene especially. So yeah, we'll see.
I think a couple of other roster changes I saw. New Illuminar roster, thinking about the polls that we talked about before. PHR, Mino, and Morels is like the core 3 of experience, and then a couple of newer guys. So we'll see if they get some regional Swiss invites here or there, and we get a bit of a look of them. Obviously, the ex-LDLC guys, I mean, you would have been a little bit more familiar with them than me, but they got signed by Falcons, and they brought Kyojin from getting dropped by Vitality. So I don't know. I haven't seen much of them coming into sort of recent times to when they were back as LDLC, but I don't know. Maybe this lineup can do something.
Yeah, I think that this is a much better version, right? The LDLC lineup, Sixer and Lambert were definitely just kind of chilling.
Yeah.
To be honest, you You know, they were doing okay. They'd enter the odd tournament here or there, but I'm not really sure what the situation was with being like salaried and stuff like that. You don't want to pry, but definitely did look like they were just kind of, you know, playing the odd tournament and having a good time and getting some results here or there, but nothing super impressive. And it always was actually the likes of Maka, the likes of Hadji, who were the most impressive.
For sure.
So Kio's kind of good to see as well that he's finding a bit more sense in how he likes to, you know, play in a team. Because I
I
think
was
the K23 wasn't
surprised.
it? K23 and
Yeah.
Simon and stuff. So
I
yeah.
thought it'd go back, to be fair. Like, when they got dropped by LDLC, I thought this is it. Kios is coming back to CIS, but apparently not. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. The other one that we're more familiar with is Coalesce, the UK org. International roster. I might be a little bit more on the fence about it than other people. To me, I'm surprised about the lack of youth on this team. I thought we would see some younger guys and maybe some up-and-comers rather than guys that have been around for a while. Robin with the in-game leadership, we know that we saw him on Endpoint and then on Finest. Thomas as well. Obviously, Endpoint through Envy as well for a little bit. Sasul, the Spaniard, I think we saw on Mad Lions.
Yeah.
Manon, I actually really like this pickup because he definitely caught my eye on Young Ninjas as being aggressive, very out there, and can get a job done. And then even for Chiquino, like, that's a difficult one because obviously when he played in Tier 1 on Fnatic, things weren't great. So now going down the divisions and maybe playing some easier competition, we might see more from him. But yeah, as a whole, I'm just surprised about the lack of youth. Other than Manon, everyone on this team is like 22 or older who has been around for years in the Tier 2 scene. So that's my only surprise with this lineup.
Yeah, sorry, I think I
No,
was
you're
just
good.
kind of gonna say that, you know, it's definitely a team. I think from an org perspective, it's really great. You know, you sort of proving a little more. I don't know. I don't know that legitimacy was the word that comes to mind. I don't know if that's, you know, the correct word, but definitely sort of some foresight, you know, and some bigger ideas and wanting to expand and this kind of thing, right? And you've got some good names that are maybe going to bring in more fans and things like that. But from a team perspective, I don't know, man. Yeah, it does just feel like, you know, these are guys who, some of them have played together a little bit, so there's a bit of recognition there, but they're again players that maybe have worked their way towards the ceiling pretty comfortably in the past, and, you know, are yet to sort of break through it. Couple of, you know, personality issues as well, maybe with some of these players being, you know, not great when it comes to the super stressful situations, whether that is a Jaquinho, as we saw in the end of Fnatic, like performance wise, or whether it's just sort of communication wise and keeping things cool on the team and whatnot. So I think certainly it's going to be a bit of a difficult one for them to get past the top 30 in my mind. But at the same time, I think we do have, a couple like Sasol, Jaquinho, Manon, still solidly for me, looking to kind of prove themselves in a big way, right? Jaquinho, it feels kind of weird to say that, but the Fnatic pickup, I think they were trying to stick with a Swedish roster, and he had like a good couple of games, but never really hit his mark. And for me, I think he came from a bit of their academy system, didn't he? So I think for me, he needed to build up a bit more tier 2 experience before getting that big call up. You know, it seemed we've got Munacy where it's like, great, we've found a gem. Jaquinho wasn't quite able to hit that same kind of promise.
Yeah, I mean, Coalesce themselves just lost 16-7 to Big Academy in a Pinnacle Cup qualifier. So obviously it's still early doors for this side. Like, there's no denying that these guys still have time to learn and time to work together and whatnot. But it has been a little bit interesting. Just having a look through like the Liquipedia transfers and seeing what we can talk about a little bit here.
The only other one. Oh, if you got Ryan,
I was gonna say the Entropic Academy pickup. Right, I'm not sure if anyone saw that.
I saw that.
I was shocked at some of the ages of some of these players, right? For those maybe at home that didn't see that announcement, right? It was, if I'm not mistaken, an average age of 15. or maybe even younger than that as an interesting one there. I was obviously keen to see these guys play, and I mean, they're not exactly going to get any big invites just yet, just because they are so young and we know nothing about them. But the Entropic Future name now currently holding some incredibly young players. I think one of which was like 13 or 12 or something like ridiculously young.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought I'd sort of throw that into the ring and sort of at least mention it, because again, a team that I don't think we can talk much about just because there is no history. But it's always an exciting prospect where maybe you don't get the call up exactly to the Entropic roster that we know, but that Prague division where maybe, you know, we need a stand-in now, or maybe there's an opportunity where, I don't know, we see a player sit out or we need a stand-in. The call up of some of these young players, you know, insane. Absolutely unbelievable to see such young players, right? I was just looking at the Twitters of some of these people.
Luke's 14, I think.
Yeah, Luke's 14. I think we have Woozy as well, who's like 15 or 14. It's like
crazy,
man. Such young talent. Such young talent.
Yeah.
Skriv. The only thing I was going to note there is that they're a Czech-Slovakian team, so they're not like the Russian team that we know of, the main Entropic. But that's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely it is a cool. I think there's a bit of weirdness going on at the moment, right? So they are like Czech owned, I think, with HLTV changing some of the flags and whatnot, because now Na'Vi has like a Ukrainian flag because that's who they're owned by. So I think some people were getting a bit confused.
Okay.
You know, so yeah, they have another team as well, don't they? They have like Entropic Prague, that I think again are a slightly older but more Czech focused, Czechoslovakian. I think it's like Czechia, the region or whatever, you know, focus kind of team. But yeah, it does make me feel a little bit ill. You know what I mean? You roll down the landing page and Luke's born in 2007. It's just unreal, to be honest. So, you know, the esports years, they do catch up to you a little bit. You know, 2023, nearly 24. It's my birthday in a couple months. On the 21st, actually. So 21st of May. So thank you very much. Yeah. ReTr00 is on the 23rd, so we'll be expecting cards from everyone watching currently. But I mean, you know, it is wild. But at the same time, obviously, in terms of the developmental stuff, and we touched on the Academy League a little bit, it's all good, man. It's all good. And I think it's a bit of a healthier way to grow a team is to, you know, kind of have them all together, have them indeed as an academy team, and then you know where you can turn. You can be like, right, I'm 15-year-old player or whatever, I can speak to my manager or what have you, and they can get Nickelback to come in and give us a in-game leading, you know, 101 or whatever, right? Rather than sort of navigating and being, you know, you got to think about like Frozen, for example, who was a super young player, really impressive, and Ecstatus, I think, was the name of the team at the time.
That's right.
It's difficult for him to figure out at that time, like where to go, who to talk to, and, you know, that kind of thing. And I think certainly some of his development, still a great player and on a pretty good team and all that, but some of his development has definitely been held back because of that, I think. And certainly one of the bigger ones that the Academy League is really going to give these young players is that LAN experience. You know, that if you make it to the playoffs of the league, you get to go and play your games on LAN, get used to having, you know, your little square inch or whatever space that they get given, being right next to your teammate, chairs maybe a little uncomfortable, you know, all these little things that I think are going to get in your head the first time that you're on a LAN. You get them out of the way against, you know, teams of a similar caliber, rather than having all the worries, and then you're also playing like a top 5 team and you're not expected to win. So I think that it's a really, really healthy system.
Yeah, the only other, I guess, events of recently with rosters is thinking of Czech scene, Enterprise going international, maybe realizing that the skill ceiling was far enough, that they've picked up Blitz, that Romanian guy from Nexus, and then Miltsy, I think, I don't know him, a Finnish player. So maybe just realizing that local talent's not the way to go. We need to go international. Finest finally got a 5-man lineup. I think we've been hoping for that for quite a while. And that sort of had a knock-on effect because they added Twist and Pleasant to actually make Finest core Swedish for the first time. That now we've got this new Savage lineup that we can maybe dive into because that's got some very good players on it.
I think certainly the golden pickup for me stood out, right? That was the one that really it's kind of difficult the way that the past few years have gone for this guy. You know what I mean? Like he had a really good initial pickup into Fnatic. Again, another player who came from their academy system. Looked great and peaks and troughs and whatnot. Moved to Cloud9. That was all a bit weird. But yeah, and then kind of since then, you've not really heard from him, right? So we'll see. I think that this team, there's a lot of experience here in Golden, in Draken. Draken maybe brings some ideas from a different video game now as well, right? And Tensky as well, actually, I think had a bit of a stint in Valorant for a few months. Devil Walk on the coaching. It looks fairly legit. You've got a lot of experienced players here. But you have this weird kind of paradox where they have the experience at like the top level and working their way through that. Maybe Devil Walk has a little bit more, but has not been in and around coaching this tier 2 level for a while. I think that's one of the things that you've got to be very careful of, is getting caught off by how unpredictable and how crazy some of these teams can be at this kind of level, right? So we'll see how they do. But I think players like calling for Golden could be quite tough when it is these teams that are very unpredictable and just have a completely different way of approaching the game in a qualifier or whatever, as you're starting to prove yourself before you get the invite. So they have to hit the ground running, I think, for my money. But there's a fair bit of potential here. I don't know. There's a good number of players, though, that have not necessarily been the stars of their respective teams. You know, we've got a lot of like supportive elements, it feels like. So we'll see what happens with the roles.
Yeah. I think the only other one that comes to my mind is the new Bulgarian team, Spellin and Victor, coming together for this Kick lineup. I didn't even know Kick was still going. I always remembered Kick as being one of those Spanish-Portuguese sort of teams that were just donkeys years ago. Like even when you and I were first coming up, that we were seeing them play. But I don't even think they've held a CS team for 2 years. So I don't know what made them want to come back into CS. I know that they obviously are involved in other games. And the lineup doesn't maybe speak volumes as being a high-end team. But with Spellin and Victor, they've got some experience.
Yeah. It's a weird one, isn't it? It's a weird one. I don't know. I feel like the whole Bulgarian shuffle has been one that has piqued a lot of people's interest with the whole like Skade movements. Obviously, Fiend losing out on a couple of players, and obviously this new lineup as well with Kick is I don't know. Yeah. It's a shame that we don't have like an ESL Premiership for Bulgaria. You know, like something like that. Because,
you get a lot of teams.
Yeah, there is a lot of Bulgarian teams out there now, right?
The only thing that surprised me is how Harnell Red Star's not on this team. Like, what's happened there? Those were like the two biggest players on Fiend. The team's died, and both of them are just not even on a team. I don't know. There's been quite a lot of transfers recently.
That's a really fair point, though, because I think you have, you know, Victor and Spellan on this team are two of the more like experienced Bulgarian players, and I'm not sure. Victor is kind of crazy, like, you know. He's not maybe as old as Bubble, but he's definitely like aging a little bit, and he still is able to put up some pretty good numbers. But I think again we have like two very good players on or in the online space, not really being able to prove it as much online. Maybe that is because of, you know, the pandemic and things like that. I think that, you know, Han especially should be given a chance to really like thrive in a team like this. So it does feel a bit weird. But I think they'd still be decent, and you know, it's another Fiend-esque, you know, battling with Skade for that top spot, and that kind of competition in the Bulgarian scene, I think is really healthy for the way that they play everyone else at the end of the day. So they always have, you know, exciting games and whatnot, and that firepower of the Bulgarian scene that we always talk about, ever present. But I don't know. I think that this one for me, Skade looks a lot better. to be honest with you. So we'll see what happens. I think that certainly they could, take a few, but Fiend were more competitive, in my opinion, with the Skade roster at that time. I don't think that this one will be as competitive.
Nah, agreed. Any final thoughts, gents, before we close up? No? Go on,
yeah, I mean,
RMRs.
just go watch the RMRs, see you at the major, maybe. Hopefully, well, I don't know. I want Endpoint to win, but now that I've said I'll get a tattoo, there's a little bit of resentment there. So we'll see. I can't be doing. They're expensive for what they are. You know what I mean? They are a little expensive, so I can't.
Is
be
it
doing
just the
so
cost factor, Skriv? Is that it? It's not the fact that you got a massive Endpoint logo on you. It's the cost.
I mean, yeah, because then it just starts to become. I just look like some kind of a shill for the teams or whatever. That I'll just
start looking like.
If you ask me, I'll get your logo
fighter.
tattooed. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, mate. I don't know. But nah. We said if they win the major, which is that's quite a lot. I could see them making it the major for sure.
Yeah.
There you go. There's my closing thought. Endpoint for the major.
Yeah. Dweg, any bold statements to be made in the major, or are you just gonna be a shut book?
Nah. Keep it quiet. Keep it quiet. It's in my head, but saying it out loud here on stream, not a fan. Not dangerous. That's the word.
All right. I appreciate you joining me, gents. Thank you very much. Of course, the end of episode 1. Thank you very much for joining me. Until then, we'll see you next time here for the Tier 2 Talk.